Warning: this episode contains brain food that will lead to improved emotional and social intelligence. Give us 1 hour and we'll help you change the way you think about happiness. Harvesting Happiness with Lisa Cypers Kamen is fresh, optimistic, and purpose-driven media that promotes well-being from the inside out. Each week, Lisa spotlights diverse trendsetters and change agents who are the greatest contemporary thinkers and doers, devoting their lives to creating a better world in which to live. Your host, Lisa Cypers Kamen, is a widely recognized applied positive psychology expert, author, documentary filmmaker, and lecturer specializing in optimal lifestyle management. Let's get to it. Here's Lisa.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining me on today's show, where you will learn how to get tougher, smart moves for resiliency and performance. My first guest is Dr. Daya Grant, who holds a master's degree in kinesiology, sports psychology, and a Ph.D. in neuroscience from UCLA. Daya is a certified mental performance consultant through the Association of Applied Sports Psychology. Daya is also a certified yoga teacher with more than 15 years' experience. In her private practice, Dr. Grant helps elite athletes cultivate mental strength and elevate performance while finding fulfillment in the pursuit. And I have Daya in the house. I'm so excited to have a conversation with you, Daya, because we share a love of a lot of the same things, we realized.
Yes, I am thrilled to be here. It's such an honor. And I always love connecting with amazing people who love all of these same things.
Yes, you and I were talking about our favorite Peloton teachers, which made me giggle, you know?
Yes.
Who gets us dancing in our seats?
Absolutely.
Let's talk about, sort of break it down, that you work with peak performance athletes and you also help sort of mere mortals scale down, applying the same philosophy and methodology using neuroscience, yoga, sports psychology, et cetera, et cetera. And I would love for you to share a little bit about the neuroscience behind yoga, because people don't understand that there is a science there.
Yes. Well, what's so cool is we forget that the yogis, the original yogis who were first doing this practice thousands and thousands of years ago, were the scientists of their day, right?
Yes.
They were experimenting, they were posing questions and then experimenting with it and seeing what the results were, and then making some tweaks and adjustments and seeing what came from that. So now when we talk about the science of yoga, it's more the modern science of yoga. It's the tools that we now have available, such as neuroimaging, brain scans, such as different psychological and physiological measures. Those are the modern techniques we have at our disposal. But really, we know this practice works. It's now just applying today's science to this 5,000, 10,000-year-old practice. And that's really exciting. And there's a lot that has been done, but there's so much more yet to be done. And I just love keeping up with the research and seeing what is happening in the brain structurally and functionally when we practice yoga. Are there changes after a single 20-minute yoga session? And when I say yoga, I'm really talking about both the asana practice and the meditation practice. And of course, researchers parse those out, but it is tremendous what we're finding, and the proof is really there. I mean, this stuff works.
Well, you say something really interesting, and that is the 20 minutes. Because, for people who have been practicing a long time, oftentimes we think, well, unless we have that full 1 hour practice, that we're not getting the benefits of that practice. And what I just heard you say is that's not true. Even a short little session can do a lot.
Absolutely. And it's cumulative. So if all you have is 5 minutes to meditate every day or 20 minutes to move through an asana practice, then over time that adds up and that builds. And it doesn't take much for our physiology to change. So yes, absolutely. In 5 minutes of meditating, we already see changes in brain waves. We see changes in heart rate variability. There are all these things that are modified after a short practice. After 20 minutes, we know that there's something happening with activation of the default mode network, which I talk about a lot because it's relatively new in terms of its discovery. And we know that the brain at rest is not really at rest. It's always doing
never
something.
resting.
It never is. And so the default was found actually by accident when neuroscientists realized that, oh my goodness, when a participant in a study is not doing a particular mental or cognitive task, their brain is actually activated. And there's a baseline activation there. And that's what's called the activation of the default mode network. But what's important to know is if the default mode network is overactive, then we get something like rumination, and that can lead to anxiety, depression. So we really want to have a nice balance between our mind at work, our brain at work, and something that looks a little bit more restful than that default mode network. So meditation, we've seen recently in recent studies that meditation decreases activation of the default mode network, which is awesome. I mean, we're now talking about a very practical way in a short period of time to reduce our chances of slipping into that ruminative state, which all of us have done. And I think the last 2 years, when we've spent a lot of time alone and isolated, it's easy to shift into that self-referential thought to really internal thoughts. And we have this technique that requires nothing but ourselves that we can activate and use to balance that.
And just as a reminder, please share the emotional and physical benefits of this practice, even these 5 minutes a day, because, and you mentioned about the heart regulation, blood pressure, but there's more.
Yes. Oh my goodness. There's so much. Again, as I was saying, there's a cumulative effect. So after one practice, I mean, even let's not even talk about 5 minutes. Let's talk about taking a single deep breath. Like as you're listening to this, just take a single deep breath. Well, let's just do it together. We'll pause for a moment and let's just take a deep breath. In and out. Okay. That's all it takes to slow things down. And emotionally, you're now creating a little bit of space between stimulus and response. I think when we talk about stress, when we talk about this hustle culture that we're in, when we're talking about go, 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 and the 4-letter word that I really don't like, busy, it's this hyperactive, just constant movement. And that single deep breath where you're really focusing slows things down, and you now become less reactive, more responsive. And emotionally, you're balanced. You're able to now see things, like zoom out and see things from a better perspective. And you're not so caught up in what's going on. It's amazing how much the breath is tied to our thoughts. So when we sit down to meditate, if you've ever done a mindfulness practice and you're simply observing the present moment and your body's response to it, it's sometimes interesting to notice that, oh my gosh, my breath is pretty shallow. It's moving pretty quick. And my thoughts are going all over the place. I'm certainly contributing to that, 70,000 thought figure a day that we estimate. But when you slow down, you slow your breathing, which comes naturally through a short meditation practice or at the end of a yoga practice or a restorative practice, then you're able to slow your thoughts and you have a much better grasp on the activity in your brain, what's going through your mind, and it's easier to handle it. And anecdotally, we know that. And now the neuroscience supports that. And then there's also findings looking at how your brain actually changes in structure over time. So again, cumulative effects, short practices as consistently as possible can have profound results. One example is the hippocampus that is tied so directly to memory changes over time as we practice meditating. And the thing with the hippocampus is that it is very strongly connected to the insula, which is part of your brain that's very much involved with emotional regulation, and it's a deep, deep part of the brain. And when it's also involved with fear. And so we see over time, cumulatively, these short practices can actually shrink the insula in size, which means that because it's tied to the hippocampus, your fear memories may detach in some way, not necessarily shrink, but you have space between your self, your present day self, and these fear memories. And
that's super
that's
interesting.
tremendous.
That is,
our brain is actually changing not only in structure, but also in function.
That is fascinating. I want to ask about the time it takes for the brain, and I think I already know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway, to shift in mental conditioning. I mean, because what I heard you say, it's like even from the first 5 minutes, you've got to shift.
Yes. Yeah. So this is what's interesting. And I think there's a lot of research yet to be done here. We do know that there's a pretty immediate shift. Yes, from a single breath. Yes, from 5 minutes. Yes, from 20 minutes. However, how long does that last? And what we see so far is it doesn't actually last that long. So you can't get away with a 5-minute meditation practice today and then expect the next 2 months to be glorious.
Point well taken.
But there may be, and this is where the data still needs to support this, but there may be a cumulative effect so that if you're doing a 5-minute meditation practice or, a pranayama practice every day consistently for a year, then maybe there's a longer effect there. But we know that the brain, there's a lot of neuroplasticity, a lot of changing that happens in the brain, and it is very easy for it to go back to where it was. And we can feel that. I think any of us who have had a very consistent meditation practice have these periods where we slip out of it. And once we're in that, after a period of time, you start to realize, I feel out of alignment here. I feel a little bit more reactive. I feel a little bit more emotional. It may not happen the first day you don't meditate. It may for some, but for others, it may take some time.
Day three for me.
So yes, the effects are immediate, but how long they last, we have yet to determine. And most likely it builds over time. So the more consistent you can be for longer is going to be better.
So the case for the meditation, albeit a brief one, is in part as a stress inoculator.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that it not only does it calm us down, but it is preventative for come what may.
Yes, absolutely. And we've seen that. There's some really cool research looking at, they call it stress resilience. So you practice meditation, and what you're doing is, yes, you're inoculating your brain, protecting it against the effects of stress. And that is something we can all benefit from, whether you consider yourself a high performer or not. We're living in this world where there's a lot going on. There's a lot of heaviness. There's a lot shifting and changing. And how do we anchor ourselves? Well, we do it through this practice. And yes, and the neuroscience and psychology data says this can protect your brain from stress down the road.
We are going to take a break, and when we come back, we will continue the conversation with Dr. Daya Grant. To learn more, please visit diagrant.com, on Twitter at Dr. Daya Grant, and on Instagram, Dr. Daya Grant. Here comes the break. We'll be right back, and that is a promise. Hang on just a minute. Before we take that break, let's talk about the challenge of finding all your grocery items in one place at affordable prices these days. But luckily, with Thrive Market, our proud sponsor, I get everything I need with ease, efficiency, and cost savings delivered right to my doorstep. Between producing this show, running my practice, and traveling for work, I'm always short on time. That's why I'm a member of Thrive Market and get top-notch, carefully vetted provisions I can trust. That means everything from healthy pantry essentials to sustainable meat and seafood to non-toxic cleaning and beauty products shipped to my front door. Thrive Market is serious about providing great value and price matches its products. If you find a lower price anywhere, Thrive Market will meet it. Finding everything you need on Thrive Market is a snap because you can filter your wants and needs by values and lifestyles to find what works best for you and your family. Shop by what you eat and what matters most to you. Thrive Market offers more than 5,000 food, home, and beauty products to choose from to help keep your family and home happy. Recently, I stocked up on Bob's Red Mill, extra thick rolled oats, and polenta corn grits, some of my favorite pantry essentials. Whether your lifestyle is plant-based, keto, gluten-free, zero waste, or BIPOC-owned brands, Thrive Market has got you covered. And when you join Thrive Market, you're joining me and a community of more than 1 million numbers strong in paying it forward to sponsor other families in need. Let's not forget about their fast and carbon neutral shipping that is also helping to better our one precious planet. Join Thrive Market today and get $80 in free groceries. That's THRIVE market.com/harvesting and get $80 in free groceries. That's thrivemarket.com/harvesting, thrivemarket.com/harvesting. Now let's take that pause.
To learn more about cultivating sustainable well-being at home and the office, visit harvestinghappiness.com and explore Lisa's experiential on-site brain fitness workshops, corporate programming, and speaking engagement services.
And we're back. But before we get back to it, let's talk about the importance of making time to play. Even for grown-ups, we work hard, and yet we don't always give ourselves the permission to have fun. Everyone deserves a little downtime. When I've got a few minutes to spare, I love to amuse myself with Best Fiends, an exciting puzzle adventure game where you can have some silly good times anytime, anywhere. Best Fiends is my go-to digital play pal, and I'm happily hooked. If you're anything like me, you will be too. Not to brag or anything, but I'm kicking some serious butt and about to hit level 7,524. I feel like an accomplished champ. The fun never ends at Best Fiends because there's always fresh content and pop-up challenges to conquer. I pinky swear you will never be bored or run out of goals to achieve. You'll never be stranded without fun at your fingertips and can even play offline. Don't blame me if you end up kind of obsessed. Need a little digital distraction or some mindful mindlessness? Stress less and play more, and add a little more joy to your daily routine. You've earned your fun time. Go to the App Store or Google Play to download Best Fiends for free. Plus, earn even more with $5 worth of in-game rewards when you reach level 5. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends. Now let's get back to the conversation. And we're back, continuing the conversation with Dr. Daya Grant. We're talking about getting tougher, smart moves for resiliency and performance. So Daya, let's talk a little bit about the elite athletes that you work with and how you train with them, and then how that scales to the average person like me.
Yes, absolutely. So they come to me with a variety of challenges that they're dealing with. For the most part, everyone wants to perform better, more consistently. And the underlying reasons for the inconsistency vary. Some may deal with pre-competition anxiety. Some may deal with motivation ebbing and flowing. Others may have had an injury and they're dealing with some fear about returning from that injury and not getting re-injured. The reasons vary, but all of these high performers are passionate about what they do and they want to perform better, more consistently. So we use a variety of tools, and I do not believe that there's one toolkit for everybody, nor do I believe that tools are always going to work for the same person in different conditions. So my job is to really empower them to learn all of these tools, to hone them, and then to know, when do I need to use this one versus this other one? And part of being a mentally tough athlete is being able to make those adjustments, is being able to say, okay, hold on, this isn't working. I've got to pull out another tool. But that's great because I've trained this one as well. So some of the things we do, I mean, meditation is a pillar of my practice, and every single one of my athletes, and I also work with other high performers who aren't athletes, they all get into meditating. I really am a meditation pusher because of all the data.
It works.
Yes, it works. It works. So that's a big piece of it. And there's a lot of stress management that we do. There is learning a variety of breathing techniques and then knowing, okay, I'm feeling really anxious before I go up to bat. I'm going to practice some 4-7-8 breathing and really tap into my parasympathetic nervous system just enough so that I can find that sweet spot in which I need to perform. Or it's, I'm feeling really chill. Maybe I need to fire things up a little bit. Okay, like we can breathe differently. We can focus on the inhale, breathe quicker to get into that state. So a lot of what I do is first helping athletes and other high performers identify where they need to be psychologically, physiologically to perform at their best. So there's a lot of awareness that goes on there. And that applies to any of us. What do you need to have a really smooth, synergistic, exciting, beautiful interview? What do you need to bring to that? What level of intensity, of mental clarity? You need to know that. And that's going to be different between you versus Rich Roll versus Oprah. Everyone's going to have a different sweet spot. So that's important. And then it's figuring out how to get there. We also do a lot of intention setting. So what is your goal for this practice, for this training session, for this week? And again, that applies to every single one of us. We talk a little bit about sleep, a little bit about nutrition, because those are all pieces that are important.
Yes.
And I'm not a sleep expert, nor am I a nutritionist, but it's important that athletes are aware of how those pieces fit into the bigger picture.
Well, it's integrative. I mean, you can't have peak performance in life or in your sport without all of those elements. You know, the mind, body, spirit aligned and firing at a pretty high level in order to operate well.
Absolutely. And that idea actually just reminded me of another huge piece of what I do and what I think is applicable to anyone is there's so much changing and happening around us, which I alluded to before. And part of what I consider my responsibility is empowering people to connect to that within them that does not change. It's that light that we all have. It's that light that's always going to be there, whether you retire from your day job, from your sport, from however you perform and shift into something else, whether everything around you falls apart, it's always there. And so I think it's really critical that we tune into that and we pay attention to that light that we have so that as things change around us, we're not caught up in the waves. We're really able to ride them and say, okay, well, I've got this center, this core center within me, and I can bob and weave. We can handle this. We can do it.
You're sounding like a spiritual neuroscientist.
I think
Yeah.
I haven't heard that term. And I think that resonates deeply. That feels perfect.
Well, I mean, I never thought of it in those terms, but as you're speaking, that's what comes to mind, that it really is that confluence. And maybe that is the spiritual part of the yoga, the type of yoga we take off the mat and into the world.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Because isn't that why we practice yoga anyway? It's not so that we can master these asanas. It's not so that we can sit in a perfectly quiet, dark room for 20 minutes and just be. It's so that we can interact in this world. Unless we choose to be a monk, it's so that we can interact in this world and really serve our highest good and also the highest good of everyone we interact with.
Amen. I agree. I agree. I agree. And I love how you've been able to blend your practice with these different modalities and back up that which we had always suspected but weren't able to prove. And now we've got the proof that yoga, movement, breath, meditation, all of these things support not just our health, but our performance.
Yes. And that's another thing that's important to remember for any of us who aren't necessarily high performing athletes is that we need to move our body as part of this too. And when you just said that it's about the integration of mind, body, and spirit, you can't just train your mind without also training your body. And you can't tap into your spirit without training your mind and your body. And so that's what I love about the work I do. And the athletes specifically that come to me, they already have that body piece. They already have that passion for movement. And for anyone who doesn't consider themselves an athlete, well, find a way to move because the science is there to back that up too. And while I typically apply mental skills to humans that are already moving a heck of a lot, it also works in reverse. So by moving, you're able to cultivate mental skills, and that then applies to whatever it is you're doing outside of movement. So know that as you're getting on your Peloton, as you're moving through a yoga practice, as you're going for a walk with your dog, you are increasing neurochemicals in your brain that help increase resilience, stress resilience. You are activating, we know the endorphins, but they're also endocannabinoids, which we now know. Okay,
Yeah.
we know that. That sounds interesting. Yes, okay. There's so much to that whole area of science. And there are endocannabinoid receptors in our brain that are binding these endocannabinoids that are activated not when we're ingesting marijuana, but when we're moving our
Yeah,
body.
the
And
action.
it's so cool.
And I want to add one other thing to what you're saying about aging, about healthy aging, is that the more we move our bodies, the more healthy the body will be as we age, the better performing it will be cognitively as well.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, an object in motion stays in motion, right? So
Yeah.
you keep moving, and you absolutely see those cognitive benefits. And as we're dealing with huge increases in the numbers of people who are suffering from Alzheimer's and dementia and mild cognitive impairment, this is becoming really important. And we know that there are lifestyle choices you can make that will decrease your risk for those neurodegenerative diseases. So, yes, we have to move our body. And again, it's not necessarily the 45-minute, 1 hour Peloton ride or strength class. It's just doing something as many days as possible, and listening to your body too, of course, and
Yes.
knowing when to slow down. But just staying active, breathing in fresh air, going outside, playing with your kids or your grandkids or your pet, all of that counts.
Yeah. Dr. Daya Grant, thank you for being with me today. I have loved sharing this time with you. You are inspiring. You help break down, why these practices are good for us, and also give us the prescription in a small dose that pretty much anybody can do from anywhere, even sitting in your car.
Yes, absolutely. We all can apply these techniques to our daily lives and really reap the benefits from it. And that, as I mentioned, benefits all those around us too.
Oh,
So
yeah.
thank you so much for this joy in this conversation.
Oh, right back at you. To learn more about Dr. Daya Grant, please visit diagrant.com, on Twitter at Dr. Daya Grant, and on Instagram, Dr. Period. So it's Dr. Daya Grant. Thanks again, Daya. I love this conversation.
Thank you so much.
Let's take that break and we'll be right back.
Did you know that happiness is actually good for your health? Happy people live longer, are more productive, and make better partners, parents, and professionals. Connect with us on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness and follow Lisa on Twitter at Lisa Kamen for a daily dose of inspiration.
And we're back talking about what it means to get tougher, smart moves for resiliency and performance. My next guest is Steve Magness. He is a world-renowned expert on performance. He is also the co-host of two podcasts, the Growth Equation podcast with Brad Stulberg and On Coaching with Magnus and Marcus with John Marcus. Magnus has served as a consultant and speaker for NASA, the Houston Rockets, Murphy Oil, the Brooklyn Nets, and more. He lives in Houston, Texas, and he's in the house to talk about Do Hard Things, why we get resilience wrong, and the surprising science of real toughness. Welcome, Steve. Thanks for joining me on the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. Prior to getting started, we were talking about like the doing hard things, and when we do those hard things, we're not thinking about those things. We're in the doing.
Yeah, so much of it is when we're faced with life's challenges, we tend to get in our own way.
Yeah.
And we get in our own way by having this barrage of feelings and thoughts and inner doubts that kind of push us towards avoidance and inaction. And so much of it is, how do we get on the other side of that and just do the thing and then just take action? And if we can do that, it clears out so many of the problems, and we can, tackle difficult challenges in life.
Well, and what are some ways that we can play to or tamp down the choir in our heads that are so busy questioning the why we can't, and maybe put them to rest so we can just focus on the doing?
So one of the key factors is acceptance, because if you resist anything, it's almost like your brain says, oh, you're trying to resist. You're trying to tamper down these thoughts. That must mean they're important. I'm going to come back tenfold at you. So when we resist, it just causes us to spiral out of control. So the first thing I think is just accept that it's normal. That it's normal to have doubts and to want to quit and, to be unsure. And then once you can accept it, then you can do something about it. And that something, again, can be many different strategies. But one of the ones that I really like is training yourself to have this calm conversation where instead of reacting to the deluge of thoughts and doubts, you're just kind of responding to it. You're saying, hey, I hear your voice, but I'm just going to let you drift off by because you're not really significant. This isn't really a problem. I'm not really under threat. So let's just move on with life.
Let's talk a little bit about the difference between real and fake toughness.
Sure. So often when we think of toughness, we have this idea in our head of almost like this machismo, this I'm going to put my head down and grind through everything. And what that actually is that often comes from insecurity. It comes from projecting that I've got it instead of actual having this deep inner security that you can actually handle challenges. So when I look at fake toughness versus the real kind, fake toughness is often things that are associated with appearance of being tough, but not actually the underlying substance. So I'm all about the substance. It's how do you handle the challenging thing? And actually, a good friend who's was a star athlete and then went into the military and special forces put it pretty succinctly to me. He said, you can always separate the people who have the fake toughness versus the real kind, because the fake kind, they'll put on a facade. But at the first sign of like real difficulty, that fades away. The people with the real kind, they don't come in with this extra bravado. They just know, hey, this thing's going to be really hard, but I've done the work to get through it and to find my way on the other side. And that's the difference.
So really embracing what is, like not in denial about that any negative feelings or the difficulty of the challenge, saying, okay, this is what is, and I'm going to get through it. Being real.
Exactly. Yeah, I call it embrace reality.
Yeah.
And what you see across research, across sport, across, military is that when like the perceived difficulty of the task can match up with your perception of your capabilities to handle it, you're in a good spot. If you walk around with this false bravado and try and pump yourself up, fake it till you make it works on really simple and easy things to do where we don't actually need resilience or toughness, but it fails miserably when we're actually challenged. So again, and my friend in the military likes to call it, I need a humble confidence, because that little bit of doubt is actually a good thing because it keeps me sharp and focused. I don't want the doubt to overwhelm me, but I want a little bit of it so that I can, keep my head in the game.
Well, you bring up a good point about humility in the role of doing hard things, because when we do hard things, we will fail. And the failure is part of the success of the process of doing the hard thing.
Exactly. It's kind of this weird conundrum you have to unravel, right?
Right.
Because you would think, oh, failure's bad. Like we want to avoid that. But if you have that mindset, what it does is it places you in a almost state of where you're performing out of fear. Because who wants to fail? Who wants to be shown that they're not good enough? And what we know from research to practice is that when we perform out of a place of fear, we don't perform up to our capabilities. In order to perform to our capabilities, like we need to have this security to know that, hey, I can take a risk. I can maybe put myself out there. And if I fail, it's not going to be the end of the world. I'm going to learn from it. I'm going to grow. I'm going to adapt. And I'm going to get better for next time.
Well, it's like the different kinds of stresses. You've got like the distress, which is that negative taxation on the body, right? You've got cortisol, excessive amounts of cortisol, adrenaline running through your body that are not firing with purpose, right? They're there because you're distraught or over anxious, versus eustress, right? That sort of positive stress that propels us forward with anticipation and excitement.
Right. It's that difference between anxiety and excitement. And, I forget who said it, but there's a wonderful quote that essentially says, can you get the butterflies flying in formation?
Ooh, right? That's good.
Yeah. So and that's what it's about, is like, we're all going to feel stress. But as you pointed out, there's different kinds of stress. And, part of what kind we have depends on our appraisal and our mindset going into it. If our brain sees this as, hey, this is a kind of stress where you're actually in danger and under threat, then it's going to go towards the negative. If your brain kind of interprets it as, hey, this is stress, but this is just getting me prepared to do something really challenging, then you almost get that boost, that excitement of like, yeah, this is going to push my limits, but this is kind of what I live for, and it makes me feel alive.
Yeah, it is that secret sauce that makes us want to do things, want to go outside of our comfort zone and challenge ourselves in order to grow.
Right, exactly. And it's all about kind of how do we capture and utilize that so that it's pushing us in a positive direction versus becoming, again, this thing based on fear, anxiety that pushes us towards avoidance. I mean, in reality, it's very simple, right? Going back, thousands of years, it's like if we encounter something that is stressful and threatening, we either approach it or we avoid it.
Yeah.
And for most of things in modern society, they're not actually that dangerous. So we need to like push towards that approach side and not towards that avoid side.
Let's talk about the importance of purpose and meaning to the doing.
Yeah. So purpose and meaning are almost like they're our superpowers, because what modern exercise physiology tells us is that, in any sort of competition, we never actually reach our limits. But how close we get to them, how far we can push into that well, is dependent and almost entirely on like how meaningful is this activity, right? You hear these stories, and some of them are apocryphal, but some are true, which is like parents do amazing things like lift a car if their child is trapped underneath. And there's some truth to that. And in the research, they call it hysterical strength. And the reason that works is because essentially your brain kind of goes, oh, okay, this thing is really important to me. So I'm going to loosen the reins and just let you have at it and go for it. And we'll worry about the consequences later. And to a smaller degree, that same kind of concept and mindset applies when we look at taking on whatever life's challenges are. As if we have meaning and purpose behind it, that can act as the jet fuel to propel us to do very difficult things.
This term hysterical strength I have not heard before, and it is a good one.
Yeah, I love it. I came across it in the research not too long ago because it kind of gets at this idea. Yeah. And it's not only just like how do you handle difficult performance challenges. If you look at the research and experience and psychology behind people who go through harrowing times. For instance, there's a whole bunch of work done on those who survived the Holocaust.
Yes.
And person after person commented, the research shows that if they could find meaning in that adversity, if they could find something that was greater than themselves in that adversity, they were able to not only withstand it, but also make sense of it afterwards and not suffer as much of the traumatic experiences as they went through. So for the vast majority of us aren't going to go through anything that comes close to that. So it just reminds me that finding and making meaning out of whatever we're going through is a very important aspect of handling challenges.
When we're talking about navigating the mission in our lives, we tend to set a roadmap up for ourselves and then become rigid and locked into those directions rather than see that we've constantly have to course correct.
Yeah, you're spot on. And I think this is almost one of these misconceptions around toughness and resilience is we often think it's like, oh, to be tough is to persist, to just put our head down and like go down this path. But in actuality, part of toughness is like the self-awareness to put your head up above water and look around and say, am I still headed down the best path?
Let's take a pause. And when we come back, we will continue the conversation with Steve Magness. To learn more, please visit stevemagness.com. You can find Steve on Twitter at Steve Magness and on Facebook, Stephen Magness, and that's with the PH. On Instagram, Steve Magness. We're talking about do hard things, why we get resilience wrong, and the surprising science of real toughness. Here comes the pause.
Who says money can't buy happiness? Whether you are a skeptic or seeker, check out Lisa's new book, Are we happy yet? 8 Keys to Unlocking a Joyful Life, a boot camp manual for greater emotional fitness, is available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, IndieBound, and HarvestingHappiness.com. Here's a truth bomb. Emotions are contagious, and happiness is a universally desired state. But we tend to forget that we all have the freedom to be happy or the liberty to be miserable each day, regardless of external circumstances. Explore the journey of human happiness, how to find it and keep it, with Lisa's documentary film, H Factor. Where is your heart? Visit HarvestingHappiness.com to learn more.
We're back, continuing the conversation with Steve Magness, talking about getting tougher, smart moves for resiliency and performance. Steve, let's talk a little bit about how we can apply doing hard things to prepare for life's biggest challenges.
Sure. So in researching and writing the book, one of my favorite places or the research that I looked at was actually in parenting, which isn't a place that I expected to go in this book. But what I found was fascinating in that there's decades of work that essentially shows that in parenting, the best outcomes tend to come when we pair what's called high levels of demandingness, which is high expectations and all that stuff, but we pair it with high level of what's called responsiveness, which is essentially, do you support your child? Do you cater to their needs? And when you don't have that responsiveness and you just have that expectations and demandingness, it totally backfires. You end up with bad outcomes of kids who are more likely to get in trouble and have discipline issues and all this good stuff or all this bad stuff. But you need that kind of balance of like expectations plus like responsiveness and care. And I think that is such a wonderful way to look at things, because I think that applies not only in parenting, but in everywhere else. Is often when we think of resiliency and toughness, we think of like, oh, I've just got to, have high expectations. And if you're a leader or boss in the, executive or office space, you think, oh, I've got to lead by example and like put down some harsh rules and expectations. And just like in parenting, that backfires if you don't have that responsiveness, that care, that support, that feeling that people can, grow and adapt and take risks in your environment. So, I think this is huge. And then the other thing that I would say is applying it to real world is I saw this up close in person during the pandemic when watching my wife, who is a elementary school teacher.
Oh, a saint.
Yes.
Total saint.
All teachers are amazing, but it was eye-opening because I'm watching these concepts of how to handle resilience take place in the real world, because herself, her class get thrown for a loop like we all did. And it's like, you're going online, you're now wearing masks and all these challenges. And what I quickly learned is that kids are highly adaptable if you explain to them why and you give them the space to do so. And I think so often we don't do that, with kids, but even as adults, we don't give that clarity, which allows people to process and then say, okay, this is going to be a little bit different, but you know what? I'm adaptable. I can handle it.
And resources, clear resources, like you can go here, and you might get some information here. And then you're going to discover your own research and your own toolkit that's going to make this work for you.
Exactly. I'm glad you brought that up, because it is, resources are huge. In the book, I talk about, a lot of individual on what we can do during challenging times. But one of the big pillars is building the foundation to do hard things. And that pillar comes from your community, your connections, your belonging. Like, do you have the environment that supports you as you go through, difficult times? Because again, we often think when we think of toughness, or resilience, we think of like, oh, it's the individual going through things. But that's not reality. Reality is if we have others, if we have support, if we have outlets, then we can manage and get to the other side okay and flourish sometimes under challenging times, versus when we don't have that support, when it's just us trying to figure out and navigate things, like it's too much weight on us and we'll unfortunately crumble.
Well, I don't think we're meant to do hard things alone.
Exactly. We're not at all. But yet we hold on to this idea, right? That it's like, oh, I'm the individual who's gonna, grit my way through it. But asking for help, asking for support, like that is the hard thing. That is often the best thing that you can do. It's not a sign of weakness to turn to help for others. It's a sign of strength.
And the idea that we can find discomfort, which is one of the chapters of the book, find meaning in discomfort. Chapter 11 in Do Hard Things. I particularly like this because when we can find the silver lining, when we can transform and transcend those difficult moments, we really then step into our power, into success, and into the realization of our dreams.
Exactly. And that's, to me, what it's all about is it's reframing this idea of discomfort and anxiety or uncertainty as something that is negative and to avoid, as something that, can cause us to grow and adapt and get better. And one of the ways that occurs is when we can find meaning in that struggle. And in fact, there's some wonderful research in the workplace that essentially shows that when you tell your office workers that, like, hey, seek out the uncomfortable moments, like seek out the difficult conversations, if you do that, you're going to be not only more productive, but also happier and healthier, and also connect with those in your office space much better, even if they have, different views on, different views and beliefs. But it's just that simple mindset switch of seeking out discomfort and finding meaning in that can do a whole slew of good for all of us.
But growth, in my experience, and maybe you can concur with this or not, that growth never occurs in the easy.
It doesn't. No. And
I've yet to find it there.
Exactly. And the analogy I like to use as an athlete is pretty simple. Is you don't grow your muscles by, sitting there and resting. You have to stress them. I have to go to the gym and lift some weights or go outside and go for a run. I have to have that stress and that little bit of struggle that pushes my comfort zone in order for my body to adapt and get stronger. And I think the same thing applies with our psychology, our mental health, all of those things, is that no, we don't want to, walk into the gym and try and lift way too much weight that we can't handle. But in life, we want to take on some of these meaningful challenges that press our comfort zone just a little bit, because that's the place of growth. That's where you get better. That's where you expand your horizons and your perspective and maybe see the world through a different lens.
Let's talk a little bit about creating the space for this, to respond instead of react to life's curveballs.
Yeah, so I think this is one of the central tenets of resilience, which is our typical reaction is to almost have this instant reaction where we kind of freak out and spiral out of control whenever something is difficult. You say, oh my gosh, like I can't handle this. And that pushes you to this kind of fear and avoidance. What it's about, toughness is all about, is, okay, we're all going to have that barrage of feelings, that barrage of doubts, et cetera, that kind of, get at us. But if we can create space, which means separating the stimulus, which is that feeling, from our response, which is the action that we take, if we can create some space in there, then what it does is it gives us the ability to navigate it. So whenever I'm going through something really challenging and my urge is just to like get out, to escape from the situation, I try to just sit with that experience and sit with that feeling. And if you do that after a while, what your brain learns to is just turn that alarm down a little bit. Instead of it being at a 9 or 10, it goes to a 4 or 5 and says, "Oh, we don't need to, freak out. This isn't a life or death situation. We're going to be okay." And if you can get to that space, then you can actually rationally deal with the thing.
So lean in rather than run away.
Exactly. and so much of, again, it's our natural instinct.
Yeah.
It's that flight response. Our response is run away, escape, get out of this feeling. So you really have to train your mind and body to just, as you said, lean in and accept it and be okay being a little bit uncomfortable.
And it is counterintuitive, right? Because when we have discomfort, we immediately want to get rid of the discomfort. We are adverse as human beings to suffering.
Exactly. I mean, it's again, it's our natural instinct is you feel something bad and you want to get out of that place. It's our body and brain's protective mechanism to keep us from danger. But the thing is, it's almost like that protective mechanism is hyperreactive, especially in our modern world where we can avoid difficult things. So we've got to almost like retrain it to say, okay, I get it. You're feeling this. You want to escape. You want to run away, but it's all right. It's not the end of the world. You're going to be okay.
And just get out there and do hard things. That's sort of the challenge is just go do it.
Exactly. It's taking that step.
Yes.
And the advice I give to everyone when they hear about this book and they're like, well, what should I do? It's pretty simple. Your body tells you, like, whenever you feel a little bit of anxiety, like, go towards it. Just explore it. Like, get curious about it. And if you do, like, you're going to be in a better place.
Steve Magnus, thanks for joining me today. Congratulations on Do Hard Things, Why We Get Resilience Wrong, and the Surprising Science of Real Toughness. Thanks for sharing part of your day with me.
Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Oh, me too. To learn more, please visit stevemagnus.com, on Twitter at Steve Magnus, on Facebook, Stephen Magnus with a PH, and on Instagram, Steve Magnus. Thanks for joining us on Harvesting Happiness today. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen on behalf of my guests, Dr. Daya Grant and Steve Magnus, wishing you kind thoughts, kinder words, and the kindest of actions. Until next time, remember, happiness is an inside job. Happiness is your inside job. Please go out and rock your day and remember to be kind to one another.
Keep harvesting your own happiness anytime and anywhere from the comfort of wherever you are. Subscribe, listen, and share hundreds of downloadable episodes via our free app or from our libraries at toginet.com, iTunes, Google Play, and other fine podcast platforms. To learn more about Lisa's global consulting services, please visit harvestinghappiness.com. Spread more joy by liking us on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness and following Lisa on Twitter at Lisa Kamen. Harvesting Happiness is produced in collaboration with TogiNet Radio, KBUU Radio Malibu.net, and is available on PRX, the Public Radio Exchange.